Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Social Security disability for people with Parkinson's disease. I'd like to introduce Brandon Selinsky. He is our speaker and presenter this evening. Brandon has been working with the Whitcomb Selinsky law firm, and he's litigated and done claims for major insurance companies, including American Family, State Farm, USAA, has worked for National Social Security Disability Company and represented disabled clients in administrative hearings and in the federal district court and circuit courts for 10 years. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Brandon?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you.
All right, take it away.
Okay. Would it be okay if I shared my screen to get the slides up?
You should have access to that.
Let me...
Do you see there's a share screen button? It may be green and it has a little arrow that goes up.
Okay. That should do it. Am I on there?
We got it.
Wonderful. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Selinsky. I'm with Rocky Mountain Disability Law Group. Rocky Mountain Disability Law Group opened about a dozen years ago, and we started off as a disability law firm, and we've maintained that focus ever since. Social Security is something that I'm very passionate about, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about it this evening. I want to thank Christy and the Parkinson Association of the Rockies for having me here. I have represented thousands of people in Social Security disability claims over about 16 years that I've been doing this kind of work. Most of my work has been at the hearing and appellate levels. And so that means I have a really good idea of what technically is required for benefits, but I also have pretty good insight into what is typically required on a practical level to win a case. So my goal this evening is to share both of those things with you. I want to give you an idea of what the system is and how it works, and what you can do to best prepare your own case if you get to that point. As a side note, or as I guess sort of a disclaimer, I want to let you know that during this presentation, I'll talk about Parkinson's disease and other impairments with what may seem like sort of a detached clinical manner. And I do that in order to clearly convey what Social Security requires to establish eligibility for benefits. I want you to know that I'm not insensitive to the many challenges associated with living with a disability or a weight that carrying a certain diagnosis might have. I've learned to separate that out, so I don't want to offend anybody by being so clinical about it. I think it's the best way to get the information across. So let's start with Social Security disability, and I apologize. I have two kittens in this room with me jumping around me right now, so if they wind up in the camera, that's what that is. This is their room. I'm just invading. Social Security disability comes in essentially two parts, but the unifying factor is that Social Security disability is a government program. It is intended to provide cash benefits for people who are unable to work because of a medical impairment. I'm going to see if I can, there we go, get my slides going here. That means that, first of all, you have to not be able to work. And second of all, the reason that you have to not be able to work has to be a medical impairment. So if you can't work because you can't find a job, if you can't work because you can't get a job because there aren't a lot of jobs around, Social Security doesn't care. You have to prove that it is your medical problem that is preventing you from working. There are two main types of benefits. There are some other benefits that qualify as Social Security disability, that things like disabled widows benefits, children's benefits, things like that. We're going to focus on these two because these are the two main thrusts. And while there is a unifying factor between them, they have a distinct requirement in order to qualify for either. So the first one is SSDI. You may have heard of either of these. A lot of people tend to swap these terms out and use them interchangeably, but they're distinct programs. So SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but it's an insurance policy like any other insurance policy. SSI is Supplemental Security Income. It is intended to provide people who don't qualify for SSDI with a benefit if they're unable to work because of a medical impairment. All right, so let's start with SSDI. As I mentioned, it's an insurance policy. So if you compare it to auto insurance, when you are paying your auto insurance premiums, you're covered. So if you get into a car accident, the insurance company has to pay. If you stop paying those premiums for whatever reason, your insurance will lapse. Your policy will be no good. And then if you get into an accident, you're on your own. SSDI is very similar. While you're working, you're paying into the system. So when you pay your taxes, you pay, you've got a line item that says FICA on it. That money goes into a bucket from which Social Security benefits are paid when that's required. So as you're working, you continue to accrue credits, and those credits come on a quarterly basis. I think that's probably a level of detail that you don't need a lot of right now, but if you want to ask me about that in the question and answer time, I'm happy to talk more about how to qualify, how many quarters of coverage you need, all that kind of good stuff. The important thing to know is that you have to pay into the system to qualify, and you have to pay enough. If you do that, it's just like auto insurance. As long as you are paying into that system, you're covered. And so if you become unable to work because of a medical impairment, then Social Security has to pay those disability benefits. If you stop working, you continue to have coverage most of the time. This goes back to the qualifying quarters of coverage. And again, without getting too far into it, a good way to think about that coverage is if you've been working for about 5 years or more and you stop working, then you've got about 5 more years to prove that you became disabled. So if you've been working for long enough, that's really a better way to put it. If you've been working for long enough, you stop working, you've got about a runway of about 5 years to prove that you became disabled. That doesn't mean that you need to file right away. It doesn't mean that you need to be able to prove that you became disabled right away. That's why you have that 5-year runway. The other part of that, so that's the financial part of the qualifications, is you have to pay into the system. The medical part, I will circle back to in a minute after we talk about a couple other things, because the medical part for SSI and SSDI is the same. So let's talk about the differences first, and then we'll kind of tie it together with the commonalities. And you're free to, I have slides here, you're free to read them. I don't tend to use my slides very much because I find that it's easier for me just to talk about this rather than read slides, but I'll put each of them up. When you qualify for SSDI, you also qualify for Medicare. And that can be a really big deal. It was a much bigger deal before the Affordable Care Act, when it was just really hard to come by public health insurance, insurance that's not tied to a job. Because it's easier to do that, I think that this is less on the minds of claimants, but you do get Medicare along with SSDI. It's more robust than Medicaid, which you can get with SSI. So those are the two connections. SSDI, you get Medicare. SSI, you get Medicaid. And how you get it is a much more complicated story, but know that those two, those programs go together in that way. SSI, Supplemental Security Income, is different in the financial part of the qualification. In order to qualify for SSI, you have to have few enough resources. And they use the word resources rather than money or money in the bank or anything like that, because they count a lot more things besides your bank account. But the bottom line is you have to have few enough resources to qualify. And you can see from the slide, the threshold is really, really low, embarrassingly low. Social Security should be embarrassed about this every day. You have to have less than $2,000 in countable assets. That's nothing. So it gets harder and harder to qualify for SSI as the years go by, because they've not changed that $2,000 threshold for, I think, as long as I've been doing this. It's always been $2,000. But at any rate, that's the part that you need to worry about in terms of how you qualify financially. The upside to SSI is you don't have to have worked at all. You don't have to have worked a day in your life. But if you find that you are unable to work because of a medical impairment and your assets are low enough, then you can qualify for SSI. Another big difference between these two programs is that for SSDI, your benefit amount is calculated by the amount that you paid in. So if you've worked and earned a lot of money and paid into that system, your monthly benefit, should you become disabled, is much higher than if you only worked a little bit or for whatever reason, paid much less into the system. For SSI, doesn't matter. You don't have to pay into the system, so we're not even worried about that. The amount that you get, it starts off as a set amount. I think I have this in here. I do. So right now, the default amount for SSI is $943 a month. So that's what you can get, and they ratchet it down from there. They basically dock you for room and board. So if you are living rent-free somewhere, they say, well, it's not really rent-free, you're getting that benefit. And so they dock you, they ratchet down that amount, that monthly amount, in order to offset the room and board value that they say that you're getting. So SSDI is not similarly impacted. The amount that you paid in determines the amount that you get, and that's pretty much it. SSI, the amount that you get is less reliable. They do this whole resource calculation, and then they tell you what your monthly amount's going to be. And it can change. If you have some income in a particular month, they will offset your SSI payment with that income. And I don't think I have a slide for this, so I'll just mention right now, you can work. You can be on Social Security disability, either of these benefits, and you can work. You can work up to a certain amount. And I think that's really important because Social Security, I mean, they have an incentive to have you work. They want, I guess, the instinct of Social Security is to have as few people on the benefit as possible because the government wants as many people to be productive as possible. So they will let you try to work. They will let you work a certain amount. So again, under a particular threshold. That threshold is called SGA. So you can work a certain amount, and that it varies from year to year. But if you earn a certain amount and you stay under that threshold, then your benefits won't be impacted, or your ability to qualify for benefits won't be impacted. If you earn above that threshold, then you've got a couple other tools left. You can work for 6 months and still not be penalized. Again, they're trying to incentivize you to go back to work to see if that will work out. But at any rate, the bottom line is you can work up to a certain amount, and if you stay under that threshold, you'll be okay. All right, let's go on to, so again, SSI comes with Medicaid. And that, if you want to know more about that, again, we can talk more about that. But it's the qualifications are similar to SSI in that it's resource-based, and as it says on the slide, means tested. That's what that means. They test what kind of resources you have. So in order to become eligible for SSI and SSDI, this is where the two programs come together and where the common parts of them are. There are some things on the slide that you can that are relevant to that, but really the main thrust of how you qualify is the part that is impacted by your medical impairments. So let's talk about what that is. A disability, I sort of already talked about this slide, but it's the important part is that it prevents you from working. It prevents you from doing full-time competitive work. And again, full-time meaning, as I mentioned, you can work part-time and still qualify. Competitive meaning that it's really outside of the house. So if you get one of these jobs that you can do from the comfort of your bed, that's not competitive work, and they will not hold that against you if you're able to do a job, from your recliner or from your bed or something like that. The other part of this slide, we're going to circle back to, but there are three paths to getting to qualifying from a medical basis. Let's see if that's okay. That'll come up in just a minute. When Social Security looks at your application, they go through this 5-step analysis. So you're going to file your application. We'll talk about how to do that in a minute. But you'll file your application, and then they will take an initial look at it from a local level, basically a non-federal standpoint. The local level will look at it and determine whether you qualify. And they go through these 5 steps. And the first step is, are you working? And that always means, are you working full-time? So every time I say, are you working, know that there is that exception if you don't work too much, but it is first, are you working? And if the answer is yes, are you working full-time? That's it. You're denied on that basis. So you can get denied at step 1. Step 2, do you have a severe medically determinable impairment? And this is drilling down into what a medical impairment means a little bit further. A medically determinable impairment means you have a qualified medical professional. Pardon me, my cat's making more noise than I am, I think. You have a qualified medical professional who has diagnosed you with a real medical impairment. And that comes up in somewhat rare cases. And we don't, again, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about the exceptions to that. But if it's something like Parkinson's, there has to be real testing done for that. You have to have a doctor that would be an MD or a PA would be qualified to diagnose you with Parkinson's. And that's it. So, just in order to establish this second step, a severe medically determinable impairment, you need a real medical professional, qualified medical professional to run those tests and make that diagnosis. It has to be severe in that it has to impact your ability to work. That bar is really low. It has to impact your ability to work. It doesn't have to impact it a ton. It doesn't have, one impairment doesn't have to take you out of the workforce, by the way. It can be, Social Security has to evaluate all of your impairments at once. So if your Parkinson's is currently mild, but you also have severe depression, for example, they have to evaluate both of those together as a whole. Do both of those impairments prevent you from working? So severe medically determinable impairment, again, if the answer is no, that's it, end of the inquiry, you're denied. If it's yes, then we go on to step 3. Step 3 is, does this impairment meet or equal a listing? A listing is Social Security's pretty significant, substantial list of different kinds of impairments and what you have to do to satisfy those. If you satisfy one of those entirely, so you meet all the steps that are required, Social Security will find that you're disabled, that you meet a listing. Now, so that's what that means. You meet that definition, you meet all the parts of it that you're required to. That's the first step that you can get a win at. So if you meet the list, if it's yes, then you win. If it's no, then we go on to the next step. And as I noted in the slide here, what is the individual's RFC? An RFC is a residual functional capacity. It's just fancy language for what can you do, or what are you limited from doing? And what that looks like from Social Security's perspective is, can you sit for 4 hours or 6 hours? You can stand for 8 hours. You can lift up to 20 pounds. These are the sort of metrics that Social Security is interested in, because those impact your ability to do jobs in a way that is a vocationally relevant analysis. And again, I don't want to get too caught up in the finer details of what a vocationally relevant analysis is. What that means is Social Security wants to know, can you do the sorts of things that are generally required for jobs according to this like 40, almost 50-year-old manual that is way out of date. So this manual, the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, categorizes all the jobs, or all the jobs that they could find in the late 70s. And says for each one of those, this job requires a person to lift 20 pounds or 50 pounds, or whatever. So Social Security is looking for that kind of evaluation. That's one of the things that you can do, by the way, to prepare a case. And when we get to that section, we'll talk about all the things you can do to make sure that you're well prepared for your case, or all the things that you can do to prepare your application. But getting an RFC done is, that can be like gold to a Social Security case. I had a client recently who I just represented, gosh, I think it was this week. It's been a long week, or earlier this week. And he had back problems, pretty severe back problems. Had a bunch of MRIs done. They showed severe problems, but he didn't have something that said, well, because of these problems, you're limited to lifting so much weight, standing so long, sitting so long. And despite the fact that he's in extraordinary pain all the time, and all that's very well documented, his case is kind of up for grabs. What he really needed was a doctor to say, because of this severe problem in his, L4, L3, L4, he's going to be limited in the following ways. So your best bet is to contact your doctor, do that early on, be very straight. I find it's good to be very straightforward with your doctor. I'm always very straightforward when I talk to doctors. on clients' behalf, this is what we're doing. We're applying for Social Security disability. If for some reason you think that your doctor doesn't believe in Social Security, that's a thing. So if you get that sense, I mean, it might be worth it to get a new doctor. And I rarely recommend that, and I'm not qualified to recommend that. I'm just an attorney. I don't know anything about medicine. But if your team, a significant component of your medical team, does not believe in Social Security, or even just doesn't believe that you qualify, then you need to find somebody that can work with you. And that might not mean ditching that doctor, but it might mean paying another doctor to do an evaluation, or paying a physical therapist to do that kind of physical evaluation. Sometimes you have to really be your own best advocate and fight for yourself. Let me get us back on track. So that's an RFC. An RFC is that sort of itemized list of what you are limited to do, or limited in doing. If you don't meet or equal listing, equal, by the way, equal is kind of like meeting a listing. It just means that you didn't quite meet every single component of the listing, but you got most of the way there, and then you have some other problems, the severity of which would kind of get you across the finish line. So again, don't worry too much about what equal means. You really just need to satisfy the criteria of the listing. I have in here the listing for those things that would best apply to Parkinson's, and we'll look at that in a second so you can see how that breaks down. If you get to step 4, so if you don't equal a listing or meet a listing, then you go to step 4. What is the individual's RFC, and can they do their past relevant work? So Social Security will go back 15 years. They'll look at all the jobs you had in the last 15 years, and they'll say, all right, given what we believe this person can do, can they do any of the jobs they've already had? And if the answer is yes, then that's a denial. If you can do your past relevant work, then you're not going to get disability. If you can't, then they take another step and they say, all right, well, if you can't do your past work, can you do some other kind of work that exists in significant numbers in the economy? I'll give you an example from the hearing level. This is how this would work in a hearing. The judge would have a vocational expert present. The vocational expert, their job is to do 2 things. It's not a personal thing at all. In fact, they're not usually testifying about the claimant. They're usually testifying in the abstract. And the way that works is they would first describe the claimant's past work. And I guess in that sense, they are talking about the claimant when they talk about the past work. And the judge writes that down. And then the judge will give some hypothetical questions. So the judge will say, all right, if a person with the claimant's past work was limited to sitting for 4 hours a day, standing and walking for 4 hours a day, lifting up to 20 pounds, etc., on and on, they'll give a whole description of what that person could do. Can that person do any of their past work? And the vocational expert's job is to just say yes or no. Yes, they can do their past work. Or no, they can't. Then the judge says, well, all right, are there other jobs that they can do in the economy? And then the vocational expert, if the answer is yes, they'll give a list usually of 3 jobs and how many positions exist in the economy. That's what that is. So number 4, if you can't do your past relevant work, then the vocational expert is asked to testify about other jobs that you might be able to do. So this is the framework for evaluating a claim. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think if you just have a sense of like, this is the way it works, these are the steps that Social Security cares about, then this gives us a good platform to talk about the other parts to how a case progresses. So let's go on to the next. And by the way, as was mentioned at the top, if you have questions, please feel free to type in and ask them. You can do it as we go, or we can get to questions at the end. Either way, I don't mind. All right, so I mentioned before there are 3 paths to victory. The first one is to meet or equal a listing. We covered that. The second one is to establish that you're unable to do full-time competitive work. That's the path that most people take. That's the path that questionnaire from your doctor, that evaluation from your doctor is going to be most useful for. And that's really, as a professional in this field, that's what I focus on the most. When I'm at a hearing and I'm asking a claimant about what they can do and what they can't do, that's why I'm doing it. I ask them, well, how long can you sit before you have to get up and walk around? how long can you stand before your back pain requires you to sit down? Most of the questions that get asked at a hearing, they're geared towards what are the limitations, and therefore what is a person able to do? Can they do any full-time competitive work? That lines up most directly with those last two steps of that five-step analysis, really the fifth one. So what is your RFC, and therefore what can you do, if anything? And the last one is the grid. When we talk about gridding out, the grid it's a grid. It's no other, that's why they call it that, but it considers your age. Your age is, once you hit 50, your age is an asset when you're applying for Social Security. So if you feel like getting older is always a bummer, here's one time where it's not. It can get you disability benefits, whereas a younger person might not be able to if you otherwise qualify. So we'll take each one of these in turn. We talked about listings already. Here is the listing that relates to Parkinson's. And it's broader than that. So you can see on here that it's not just Parkinson's, it's Parkinsonian syndrome, which, as I understand it, you can qualify for without having a diagnosis of Parkinson's. It's a more general term. This is one that I am going to read, and I'm going to go through this step by step because I think it is very unclear. It's written in legalese, and the average person reading this, and maybe even the average medical professional reading this, is going to have to read it a few times to get through it. So let's take it piece by piece. You have to qualify from either one of these, A or B. So I've got A on here. We'll look at B next. A is the physical. B is the mental health. And again, you only need one. You only need one of these. So A, disorganization of motor function in two extremities. And I didn't put what that means because it's exactly what that sounds like. That it says C 11.00D1, but if you look up 11.00D1, it'll tell you two extremities means two extremities. So two hands, 2 feet, one hand, 1 foot. That's what that means. So disorganization of motor function in two extremities, resulting in an extreme limitation in the ability to stand up from a seated position, balance while standing or walking, or use the upper extremities. So those are 3 different ways to qualify just in Part A. If you're going to qualify based on your physical impact of Parkinson's, these are the 3 different ways. You don't have to satisfy all of them, just one of these 3. Ability to stand up from seated position, balance, or using your upper extremities. This one I am going to explain in greater detail in just a moment here, because who knows what extreme limitation means? That can mean anything. They give you a definition of each of these things. The mental health side of it is a marked limitation in physical functioning, and so you do still have to have a physical component, but it's not as strict as what we just looked at. So you need a marked limitation as opposed to disorganization in two extremities. So is extreme limitation. There we go. That's what the word I was looking for. So marked is less than extreme. If you don't have an extreme limitation, if you can't satisfy that part of it, which I'm pointing right here with my cursor. If you merely have a marked limitation, so a slightly lesser limitation, but you also have one of the following, marked limitation in one of the following. So understanding, remembering, or applying information, or interacting with others, or concentration, persistence, or pace, or adapting or managing yourself. These each have their own very specific definitions, but they are kind of what they sound like. I mean, understanding, remembering, or applying information is exactly what it sounds like. So if you have a marked limitation in any one of those 4 different subcategories, that in addition to that marked limitation in physical functioning, you can qualify based on the listing. And incidentally, if you qualify based on the listing, as you might remember from that 5-step analysis, you don't have to go to those next 2 steps. It doesn't matter if you can do your past relevant work or you can't. No one gets to that point. You don't get to that inquiry. You qualify based on satisfying the listing. I'm going to put up these. Okay, so this is the extreme listing. And I think it's useful to just, I highlighted in red, I think, what really matters in these. So extreme limitation in the ability to stand up from a seated position means you have to be able to stand up, you have to be unable to stand up without the assistance of another person or the use of an assistive device. And it's not one assistive device or one side, it's both sides. So that means a walker, two crutches, or two canes. Again, if you merely, use that word in quotes, merely have a cane, that is not going to satisfy this particular one. Or the next one. The next one is really the same. So balance and standing, maintain balance in a standing position. Again, you have to be able to not do that without the assistance of another person or an assistive device. The last one on here is the upper extremity restriction. Inability to use your upper extremities means that you have a loss of function in both upper extremities. So both upper, this is not upper and lower this time, both upper, including fingers, wrists, hands, arms, and shoulders, that very seriously limits your ability to independently initiate, sustain, and complete work-related activities involving fine and gross motor movements. Social Security acknowledges that most sedentary and even light jobs, you need good use of both hands. And that's, I think, where this listing probably comes from, or at least what it relates to. If you are sitting at a desk, for example, think of any desk job and try to come up with one where you don't need to use your hands. It's pretty tough. Most of the time, if you're sitting or standing at a desk, you need to use both hands. Incidentally, it's worth noting that, and in fact, let's move past this and we'll talk about, I've been using these terms that I didn't explain. So before we get to grids, I've been talking about sedentary work and light work. Social Security has these different strata, different what they call exertional levels of work. Sedentary is a seated job, primarily a seated job. Might require getting up every once in a while, moving around, might require going to pick up something from the copier, but it's mostly a seated job. In addition, you don't have to lift more than 10 pounds. So if the job requires you to lift more than 10 pounds, if it requires you to be on your feet more than most of the time, if it requires you to be on your feet, not seated more than most of the time, then that's a light job. So light job, you have to lift up to 20 pounds. Occasionally, 10 pounds frequently, and you might also have to be on your feet. Could be either one of those. The third way it could be light is if it's a production pace, so if you're working pretty quickly on something. So 10 pounds for sedentary, this is a good shorthand way of thinking of it. 10 pounds for sedentary, 20 pounds for light, 50 pounds for medium, and we don't really need to talk about anything more than that. There's heavy and very heavy. If you can do heavy work or very heavy work, you're probably not going to be found disabled. It's going to be unlikely that you can do that and have an impairment that would keep you from working. It's possible. It's pretty slim. So those are the different exertional levels, and I apologize. I probably should have given you that a little earlier, but that's what we're talking about. The second path to victory, pardon me, you know what? This is actually the third path. So let's revisit the second path really quickly. I've talked about it a little bit here and there, but let's really drill down. So the second path is not being able to do full-time competitive work on an ongoing basis. And I talked about full-time, talked about competitive. Ongoing basis is the thing that I don't think I've gotten to yet. For some types of impairments, they have sort of like remitting qualities, recurring and remitting qualities. And you might have a whole string of good days. You might have a month of good days or a couple months of good days. And then you might have a whole string of bad days. So Social Security is aware that some impairments are like that. And the listings reflect that. So if you have, for example, epilepsy, you might go a while without having a seizure. And then you might have a bunch of seizures. So Social Security says, well, it has to be ongoing. And so if it only happens like once a year, that's for most listings, you're not going to qualify. Anyway, getting back to full-time competitive work on an ongoing basis, your preparation for that kind of claim is key. And I mentioned before, getting your doctor to be on board, getting your doctor to write you a questionnaire or do an evaluation, but also just treating. And this goes for any kind of case, but in particular, this second path, you need evidence. A Social Security claim is a claim. It requires proof. In order to win, you need proof. In order to get proof, you need to treat. Proof is almost always treatment records. So if you haven't been to the doctor in 10 years and you apply for Social Security, your likelihood of success is pretty low. So make sure that for whatever you're doing, go to the doctor as often as the doctor thinks you need to go. You don't have to overdo it. You don't have to try to get in there every week. If the doctor thinks you only need to see him or her once a week or once a month or once a year. But make sure that you're doing what the doctor is advising to the extent that it makes sense for your impairments and for your treatment. All right, so papering your file with treatment records is going to help drive that RFC. Another thing that will help drive that RFC, that evaluation of your capabilities, is something they call a consultative exam. Social Security will send you to a doctor. And this is true in Colorado most of the time. I rarely get a client that doesn't have a CE report, or at least Social Security didn't schedule them for. Sometimes people miss their appointments, but Social Security in Colorado is really good about getting CEs. A CE is usually a medical doctor or a psychologist, sometimes a psychiatrist. They're not usually specialists, but sometimes Social Security, because specialists are more expensive and Social Security has a budget, but it might be a specialist. And it might be a specialist in terms of if it's a neurological disorder. So for Parkinson's, for epilepsy, for neurological disorders, you're probably going to be sent to a specialist. But regardless, the CE's job is to do what is usually a quick and dirty evaluation of your physical or mental health capabilities or limitations. So for physical, they might put you through the paces. They might have you walk up and down the hallway, touch your toes, reach up above your head. It's usually not terribly in depth. If it's for a neurological issue, they might actually run some objective testing and see what those test results are. I'll give you an example of like a back problem. For back problem or a knee problem, that's a better example. Knee problem, they'd almost always do an X-ray. And X-rays, again, this is my non-doctor opinion of X-rays. They don't tell you much. They don't tell you what an MRI would tell you. And I've had doctors tell me, well, yeah, an MRI is actually over-inclusive. It'll find stuff that's not really there. I don't know if that's true, but an X-ray from a CE is rarely helpful. But that's what they do. So they'll do that kind of objective testing, and they will put together an RFC, and they'll submit that to Social Security. When that's helpful, I probably don't even see your case. So if the CE is supportive and you have some good treatment records, Social Security might pay your case right then and there. You don't have to have a hearing or anything. A good CE report can go a long way. I've also seen it just the opposite. I've seen where my client had a supportive CE report, had an evaluation from their own doctor or doctors that were supportive, and the judge still managed to say, well, the treatment records, they're not consistent with these things. And I have a lot to say about that, but none of it very nice. So I won't go into that right now. But the point is, Social Security will do something to get you an RFC. It's in your best bet to get your own. CE doctors are hit or miss. You want to have your own doctors on board. So that's that middle path to victory, is proving that your limitations are significant enough that you would not be able to do full-time work. And then number 3, the grid. I love the grid. And in fact, I have a non-attorney representative who works for me, who does most of my hearings. His name's Marty. So Marty is not, and you can do that in Social Security. You don't have to be an attorney to represent somebody at a hearing. Marty's been doing this almost as long as I have. And he loves the grid. In fact, he reviews all new cases. Can we fit them into the grid? So the grid is, it takes your age. So once you hit 50, then we start looking at the grid. Look at 50 and we say, all right, if you're 50 and you're limited to sedentary work and you can't do your past work, they're going to find you disabled. And it's that easy. It's that direct. So you don't have to go, again, you don't have to go through all that RFC stuff and figure out what jobs would be available. You have to do a little bit of that because you have to prove that you're limited to sedentary work, which again is the lowest rung on those exertional levels. I can only do sedentary, I can only do desk work, and I can't do my past relevant work. Then you can get across the finish line using the grid rules. Ages change year to year. That's no secret. And Social Security is aware of that too. So at 50, the grid rules start applying. At 55, they apply even more favorably. So at 55, you can be limited to doing light work, which is that next rung up. So you're less limited exertionally. You can still be found disabled if, again, you're limited to light work, you can't do your past relevant work, then that's going to be another shortcut to disability. So at age 50 and then age 55, those are big mile markers for being able to take advantage of these grid rules and be found disabled without having to work quite as hard. All right, and then we've got a slide here on what these different age groups are. And if you'd like, I'm happy to give you my slides or my notes or whatever afterwards, because some of these have links in them that I think are pretty useful. All right, so frequently asked questions. I'm going to directly address some of the questions that Christy gave me ahead of time. And that is, the first one is, how do I apply for benefits? And honestly, I don't remember if I do. Hey, look at that. I have a slide for that. Applications, your best bet is to do it online if you can, if you're an online kind of person. But you can always go into the local office. You have to look up where your local office is. They call them local offices for a reason. They're all over the place. There's one in Lakewood, there's one in Denver, one in Aurora. So find out where your local office is. You can very easily find that out by just Googling Social Security local office, and you put in your zip code, tells you where your local office is. So go to your local office or apply online if you can do that. SSI, my slide says it cannot be done online. I'm not sure that that's still true. I got the impression that was transitioning at one point. So, but you can call your local office and ask if you can do it online, or you can just Google it. But for a long time, you couldn't do that online. You can do SSDI online. If you are applying for SSDI, apply for SSI also. When you apply for SSDI, this is a technical thing. You don't have to remember this, but just know that, for the purpose of this discussion, when you apply for SSI, you are applying for all the benefits that you might qualify for. I don't know why they did it that way, because they don't do it in reverse. If you apply for SSDI, you are only applying for SSDI. You are not also applying for SSI. If you apply for SSI, it is technically an application for all benefits for which you might qualify, which would include SSDI. Just apply for both. Apply for both, because for SSDI, if you win, there's a lag. There's a lag in when you start to accrue back pay. If you apply for SSI and you qualify for both, SSI will fill in that gap. There's a 5-month waiting period before you actually start to accrue SSDI back pay benefits. There's not that same lag for SSI. So SSI can fill in the gap if there is a gap for your SSDI benefits. Bottom line, your takeaway is apply for both. That's your best bet. So you go in and you apply for them. And I think I'll use this slide to just talk about what that looks like forecasting down the road. So you apply for benefits and you get denied. And one of the questions that somebody had submitted ahead of time had to do with that. Like, does everyone get denied? No, not everyone gets denied right away. It has something to do with the records that they get for you. So when you apply, one of the things you have to do is list your doctors. Social Security will request the records from your doctors. If those records are supportive enough to qualify for benefits, they'll pay you right away. And I don't see that all that often, but it does happen. So the lesson for that is be thorough when you apply. And if you look up if you look up like Social Security disability advice or something like that, one of the Parkinson's associations, I can't remember which one, has something like that. They have a really good description of what you should do. It comes with some advice on how to prepare your case for Social Security. It's pretty good. It's not very detailed. This presentation is a lot more detailed than that, but one of the things that they mentioned is sit down, take your time in putting together your application, and that's good advice. So when you fill out your application, put all your doctors on there, put their contact information on there. If you can reach out to your doctor ahead of time and get an evaluation done so that that goes in right away, that's a good idea. Getting that evaluation into the first decision maker, in front of the first decision maker, could be the difference between, a year and a half before you get a favorable decision and a few months. So that's a good idea. Take your time, put together a good application. If you get denied in Colorado, actually, I was saying Colorado, but this is true everywhere now. It didn't used to be. There's a next step called reconsideration. It really is just telling Social Security, look, I think you got this wrong. I don't think that I should have been denied. Would you look at it again? And they'll look at it. And I think that seems absolutely silly, because if you go up to the average person and say, you know what, I think you made a bad decision with that. Will you rethink that? How many people are going to be like, you know what, you're right. I should have come up with a different decision. I'll change my mind. And open-minded people will be, willing to do that sometimes. But Social Security really does that. They really do take a second look at it. And I'm always shocked at the number of claimants that we get qualified at reconsideration. It happens way more often than I would have thought. So that's the next step, reconsideration. And this goes to another one of the questions that Christy sent me, but it has to do with appeals. So if you get denied at the initial application level, don't just file another application. That's another thing that I see more often than I'd like. Social Security should tell you, and they do, when they send you your denial, they say, hey, you can appeal, but you got to read it to know that. You can appeal, and you should. You appeal to reconsideration. That's the next step. But you have a limited time frame in which to do that. So don't sit on it. Don't procrastinate. Get on that right away. File for reconsideration. And at each of these steps, it's the same. I'm going to give you the same nagging speech. Make sure you do it right away. If you get denied at reconsideration, they take another look at your file and they say, no, we got it right the first time. Then again, you have to apply for it, but appeal. Appeal. The next step is you ask for a hearing. That's what the appeal really is. You're saying, I want a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. And so your case goes to the hearing level and it sits there for a while. I had or have somewhere. Hey, there we go. I know it seems like I've never seen these slides before. It's been a while since I've given this presentation, so I wasn't sure if I had some of these slides still in there. I took some of them out for this one. But for this gives you an idea of the time frames, and these change all the time. And I'm not even sure that they're accurate for right now, but they do change quite a bit. The first bullet point is really the most significant here. It's always much longer than it should. It shouldn't take nearly as long as it takes, but here we are. So getting that hearing, it says 18 months on here, and I think that is still accurate. There's some ebb and flow to that, but you can generally rely on it being about a year and a half before you actually get a hearing. That's a long time. That's a long time for somebody who can't work. So, that's why I emphasize do what you can do on the front end to try to get paid right away. It's really hard to win at the first couple levels. I find that once you get to the hearing level, the decision making is a little more, I'll say reliable. It's a little more reliable. Administrative law judges, that's all they do. They only do Social Security work. They hear cases, they go write decisions, they go home, they come back and they do it the next day. So they know the program pretty well, most of them. And while I don't agree with the pay rates, I don't agree with a lot of their decisions, they at least have an idea of what the rules are. I think a better idea than they do at the lower levels. Don't tell anybody I said that. Don't tell Social Security I said that. But that you get a more reliable outcome, despite the fact that I appeal all kinds of stuff from hearing level. We very regularly appeal. So you got an initial application, reconsideration, hearing level. The hearing level is what it sounds like, by the way. I don't want to assume that you know what that is, but you go in front of an administrative law judge. If you have an attorney, that attorney kind of directs traffic at the hearing, asks you a lot of questions, interacts with the judge, tries to get things moving along. If the outcome from that hearing is a denial, then you can appeal one more time within Social Security, and that's called appeals counsel. And so you go to appeals counsel, and it's a 2-judge panel, and you say, hey, I think the judge got it wrong. Will you take another look at it? And they do that. I think they do that not terribly reliably. So I don't think we win a ton of stuff at appeals counsel. They use software. This was like before AI was big, they were using something that looks like AI. So they would have the software that would review your entire file, I believe, and try to spot an error in the judge's decision. And if they could do that, then they would send it back down. Again, I don't think it's terribly reliable. But after that, you're out of Social Security. So if you lose that appeals counsel, then you have to go to federal court and you have to sue Social Security, file a lawsuit against them in federal district court. I do that. We do that all the time. We win quite a bit of them, which tells you that the judges are not always getting it right. And if you win it at federal district court, then it gets sent back down for another hearing. That's generally the mechanism for that. So I don't know. I think I covered how you apply for benefits kind of to death there. So let's go on and cover some of these other ones.
Brandon, we have some questions. Do you want to wait till the end, or do you want to answer some of those now?
Yeah, happy to take questions right now.
Okay, so my first question is, does the diagnosis matter? So for example, Parkinson's versus MSA, which is multiple systems atrophy, or is it only based on the manifested symptoms?
That's a great question. And it depends on what we're talking about within Social Security. I guess a short answer is yes, it might. It might depend, the diagnosis would direct what listing we're looking at. And MSA might fall into the listing that we looked at. I don't know off the top of my head. But as I mentioned, that's a broader category. It's not just Parkinson's, it's Parkinsonian syndrome, in which captures quite a few different diagnoses. So it might matter for the listing, which then directs Social Security to look at different requirements. So it can impact that. But in order to get past, say, step 2, do you have a medically determinable impairment? It does not. Doesn't impact at all. You just need to have an impairment. And that can be just about any real medical impairment. So for the most part, and then let me take it a step further. So the diagnosis does not really impact the other paths to victory that we talk about. So while it might impact the listing, it's not going to impact whether you can do full-time competitive work, because we don't care what the listing is. We care what your symptoms are at that point, for the most part. And then the grid, it doesn't impact the grid. We want to know, are you limited to sedentary work, and how old are you? So your diagnosis itself probably won't have a huge impact on your case. It doesn't usually. And I'm going to try to keep myself from getting into too many really deep down details. I think that's the best answer. Probably not, but it might with the listing.
Okay, there are follow-up. Yeah, there are follow-up. I've got a lot more. Are the SSDI work limits the post-approval based on A, the time you spent working, or B, the amount of money you earn while you're working?
Both. Great question.
Okay.
Yep. I'll explain that a little bit if you don't mind. It's substantial gainful activity. So substantial meaning, are you spending a lot of hours? So, and that's a squishy standard. There isn't a cutoff. There isn't like, if you work 21 hours, that's too many hours. But it has to look like part-time work. If you're getting paid under the limit, but you're doing 40 hours of work somehow, then you're probably going to run afoul, because that's substantial. Gainful, and actually it has to be both. Substantial, gainful has to be over that limit. So both of those things matter.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, the next question is, you mentioned that Social Security understands there can be good versus bad days. Are documentable falls useful for demonstrating impairment, or are there the only thing that matters is the standards on a listing, quote?
The standards on the listing only matter for the listing evaluation. Absolutely, things like falls. I encourage you to document things like that, because they're not usually documented, right? This comes up again with epilepsy. seizures are often not documented. If you go to the doctor every time you have a seizure, then there's documentation, but a lot of people don't do that. And so I tell my clients, keep a log, keep a seizure log. If you have a lot of falls, keep a fall log. That's, you can submit that. That's admissible evidence. And it's not the same thing as a medical record, but I would fight for that. I mean, I would tell a judge in no uncertain terms that this is the best evidence that we can get of falls, somebody keeping track of them. There's no reason not to believe that they had falls on these days. So yeah, do that.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, couple more. Does it hurt your case if you do alternative treatment instead of taking the medication the doctor has suggested?
Should have waited to the end of that question. Yes, it might. It might. If you do it instead. So if the medical doctor says you need to take this medication and you say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go get massage therapy instead, or I'm going to have my chakras realigned. Judges hate that stuff. And it's not fair. There is a little bit of room for making your own choices about your medical treatment. But if you, I'm going to bring it back to epilepsy again, just because epilepsy provides really clear examples of this. If you could be on Keppra and it would keep you from having seizures, but you don't want to be on Keppra and therefore you have seizures, doesn't matter if you're doing alternative treatment because they're not preventing your seizures, you will not get on benefits. There's a medical treatment that would allow you to go back to work. And that's the way to think about it. If medicine would allow you to go back to work, Social Security is probably going to say, well, you need to take that medicine then. And then you could go back to work and you don't need to be on benefits. There is room for latitude in certain scenarios. Like if you don't want to take opioids, if you don't want to take really hardcore pain medication because you don't like what it does to you, you don't want to get addicted, that's okay. You're allowed to make that decision. It's also not necessarily true that taking hardcore pain medication would allow you to go back to work. That's less clear than like the Keppra example. So you can have some say in what your medical treatment is, but if taking that medicine is going to allow you to go back to work, you're going to be hard pressed to come up with an explanation to Social Security about why you don't need to take that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially because the medications for Parkinson's really do help with life quality. And so that's excellent advice. Thank you. Okay, there are more. Do you want me to wait until the end or would you like us to keep going?
What I have left are really kind of frequently asked questions. So this is great. We might cover everything that I have.
Okay, next question is, what if you have representation and are requesting a hearing, but are unhappy with the representation you have? Does it look bad to Social Security if you change?
No, definitely not. If you are not happy with the representation, you should go elsewhere. And I say that as somebody who's been on the receiving end of that. I've had clients who just thought that I wasn't doing enough. And so they bailed, and not very often, but it happens. And most of the time I see it happening because Social Security takes so long to do anything at all. And so my clients are getting antsy and they think that I'm sitting there doing nothing when really there's nothing to do. It doesn't matter. If you're not happy with it, go get another representative. I don't think that reflects badly ever. I've never heard a judge question that. And there is a rule that says you can have anyone you want represent you. So go do that. Have anybody you want represent you.
Excellent. Okay, one more, well, a couple more. The next question is about private insurance versus non-private insurers. Do private insurers use the same requirements or parameters? And how does your employer's LTD transition to SSDI?
That is again a great question that has a tougher answer because I don't do LTD work. That is an entirely different system. I do know probably enough to answer that question, not enough to really get into what you need to show for LTD. Other than, I mean, I offer my employees LTD, so I have some idea. The way that LTD usually works, my understanding, is that most policies, or a lot of policies, will require you to apply for Social Security benefits. And then when you get them, they will reduce the LTD that you're getting so that basically Social Security is then supplementing the LTD. And that's written into the policy. And some LTD carriers will even provide you representation. They will kind of control your case because they have an interest in it. If you get awarded Social Security benefits, then they can reduce the amount that they're paying you. So that's usually how that works. I don't know if that covered the first part of that question.
Yeah, let us know, Shelley, if you have follow-ups to that. We'll move on in the meantime. In hearing, is it how you present? For example, if you have had deep brain stimulation surgery and you often present very well visually, or do you go to the hearing in an off state? There's a terms on and off with Parkinson's. When the meds are on, you look really good. When you're off, you look shaky maybe, or other things.
I would advise my client not to work too hard to look worse than they should, and that's at a hearing. A lot of judges will ask, "All right, did you take your meds today? Are you on your meds right now?" And for that reason, so you want to kind of be careful about what you do in order to manipulate how you would present. But I don't think you get docked too much. If you're not taking your medication and you go in there, and the judge asks you, "Are you on your medication?" You say no, then the next question is going to be, "Well, why not?" And if you say, "Well, I wanted you to see how I was not on my medication," it's kind of a check minus on that one. The judge is going to be like, "Well, you seem like you're trying to game the system." And judges are wildly sensitive to anyone they think, they get a whiff of somebody trying to game the system, and they're out of here. So I don't think it's a great move, but you can do it. I guess that's the risk. That's the risk, is that you might get busted on it.
Excellent advice. And are there any further questions? Does anyone want to pipe in with an audible question? Having trouble typing now?
Yeah, I got one. Christy, this is Tracy. Are baseline tests good or bad? Baseline, like for Parkinson's, baseline testing might be neuropsych, OT testing, PT testing, voice, just things that we can test that kind of show you're here today and 5 years from now you've declined. Is any of that part of something that would be good to have in that arsenal?
Yes, definitely. It's impossible to say whether it's going to ultimately help you, because obviously it depends on the outcome of the test, right? And how you progress and where you are during the second or third or on down the line testing. But I like all tests. So any testing that you can get, I mean, I would tell you to get it. It might not help you. You might you might be having a really good day and test really well. That's unfortunate. That's not great for you, because that test result is going to go into your file. You don't get to pick and choose anymore. You used to be able to do that. You used to be able to say, "Oof, this is a bad test," or "This is a bad evaluation. I'm not going to submit this to the judge." And that was allowed. And a lot of judges gave me a really hard time about that. But hey, it looks like they got a test. Where's the results? I'm like, I don't have to give you that, and I'm not going to. Now you have to. So while it may burn you, having a baseline, I think that sort of test is really good for exactly what you suggested. You have another test down the line. It's a progressive disease, so it's not likely that you're going to be better. And you can see, if you had that baseline while you were working, for example, this is good. I think a good example of how this might be useful to you. You're working, you get this baseline, and your results are what they are. And then 5 years down the road, you're having a tough time at work, or maybe you had to stop working, and you get a second batch of testing done, and it's probably going to show that you have declined in certain areas. That's really useful, because the way I use that is, look, judge, you couldn't have better evidence of this. This person was working. Sure, they had the diagnosis while they were working, but look how well they were operating when they had these tests done while they were working. Now they're saying that they're disabled, and look at the difference between these two tests. I mean, that's amazing evidence. I don't usually get evidence that good. So I would say that while there are some possibilities for it to not help you, it's more than likely going to be helpful, and you should do it. And it's something that your doctor probably wants you to do anyway, I would imagine. So I'm thumbs up on that.
I have a question about I'm sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
Oh, I just had one follow-up question. He mentioned about like the fall journal and kind of documenting that stuff. So I just wanted a little bit embellishment on that kind of a thing. Very, for example, there's a app out there, and it's a Parkinson's symptoms app. It's one that's approved by the FDA, and it allows you to mark all your meds all day, all day long when you take them, any good times, but on times, off times. You can go in and check boxes about, at this time of day, I'm having these symptoms. You can put in notes like, I had to take it, were you affected by sleep? Yes, I had to take a 2-hour nap today, and things like that. So is that the kind of thing that you're saying when you like a fall journal? Would that be in line with kind of what you're saying, and that could be used as evidence as to, progression of the disease?
That could be used as evidence. You could submit that, assuming you can get it into a form that you can submit. Apps sometimes are tricky, but I would guess that that one was designed to be able to get
Yes.
medical records and things like that. So
It is. It is. As a matter of fact, you get a weekly report emailed to you that's in PDF form that basically is documenting in that form everything that you filled out, everything that you fed into the system. It's also something that you can share with your doctor if you'd like.
that's exactly what I would say. You can submit it if you like. If it's supportive and it's going to help your case, sure, submit it. You don't have to. But yeah, that sounds like an advanced law. That sounds like it gives way more information. I don't know if all of that would be useful, but some of it might. And you look at it and see if it shows a progression, or if it shows that it tends to show that you're having significant problems. That's a good thing to submit.
Okay.
Sorry,
Any other?
Tracy. I'm sorry I muted you earlier than maybe you wanted. Did you have any other follow-ups?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks so much.
Okay. I want to state to those of you who may or may not have heard about that app, I cannot remember the name of it, but you do have to have a doctor's order to get into it because it does have a lot of sensitive information, medical information.
Great.
Any other questions? I thought someone tried to oh no, I have a couple that are typed, if that's okay. What if you are denied at the hearing? How long do you need to wait before refiling, beginning the process again, I guess?
I mentioned before that I advise don't refile. Don't do that to yourself. Don't be the person that shows up at a hearing with 5 previous applications that all got denied, because that legally that can have a really significant impact on you. So if rather than reapply, appeal. If you're, and there are some strategic reasons to not do that. Like if you don't feel like you qualify, you get that denial and you're like, yeah, I probably don't qualify yet. Maybe don't appeal. That's a longer conversation about the legal impacts of appealing versus not appealing, but you should appeal. I mean, keep those dates. So that's one thing that's an easily digestible piece of this is when you apply, dates are kind of everything. They're really important. So when you apply, you have an application date. You have an alleged onset date. The alleged onset date is the date that you're saying you can no longer work. That's your disability date. And if you were to reapply, then you have a new application date, and that can impact the benefits that you get. So the way that they calculate your benefits, your application date is sometimes, not always, but sometimes a significant part of that. And if you just keep filing new applications rather than appealing, you're going to just keep resetting that. And eventually it's going to cost you money. You're not going to get as many benefits, as much in terms of back pay. So most of the time you're going to want to appeal, but now I've talked my way out of remembering what the question was. So wait, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
If you're denied, how long do you have to wait? I think you did.
Yeah, it's you don't have to wait. You can just reapply, but don't.
Okay, so one more question right now. Oh, Tracy mentioned the app's title is Strive, PD, STRIV as in Victor, E, PD. So one more question. If a rational evaluation at the present time suggests that you're unlikely to qualify at this exact moment, but it will be 18 months for the process to unfold, and there's a negative progression in the disease, should you begin the application now, thinking about your future state, or do you wait until it's more likely that you'll qualify at that exact moment?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? How do you know? What does your crystal ball tell you? Are you going to be severe enough in a year, in 18 months when you hit that that hearing? You might be, but you might not be. And I tend to err on the side of, yeah, go ahead, just apply. See where that gets you. It is worth talking to an attorney when you're talking about things like this. And the last question about, do you reapply, do you appeal? There are a number of factors that can impact that. I'll go through one of them right now. So I'll tell you how that can go sideways. Even though I would tell you that without knowing anything more, if you think that if you can see that you're getting worse and worse and worse, even if you're still working, I might tell you to go ahead and apply. Err on the side of applying. It is going to take a long time to get there. And even though you might get denied the first couple times, once you get to that hearing, maybe you're going to have a good case. But where it can go sideways is if you're not quite there yet, if your problems are not documented enough to be severe, then and you get denied, and then you have to reapply. You run out of appeals, or an appeal is not the right thing for you. Then you have a hearing level denial, which it's hard to get past. So if you file a new application and you say, all right, I'm worse now, I want to get benefits going back to, let me give you some dates. Let's say you get denied in 2022 at the hearing level. You file a new application and you say, I've been disabled since before that, since 2020. Social Security is going to say, no, we already adjudicated that period of time. In 2022, we said you were not disabled. Going all the way back to 2020, you can't revisit that. And so legally, it can have some really adverse impacts if you gamble and you lose. Again, talking to an attorney when you're in that kind of situation is probably a good idea. The other date, though, that you want to keep in mind, and I know I'm kind of a little scattered about this answer, but another element is your date last insured. And that's really what you want to have in mind. I mentioned before that for SSDI, you pay into the system, you get quarters of coverage, and then once you stop working, you've got some period of time after that in which to qualify. And if you've been working long enough, that period of time looks like about 5 years. If you haven't been working long enough, it's less than that. So your date last insured is your cutoff point. You have coverage until your DLI, date last insured. After your DLI, if the judge finds that you're disabled the day after your DLI, then you don't get SSDI. And so if we go back to my example a second ago, let's say your DLI is in 2021. You filed an application, you got denied in 2022. And they said you're not disabled all the way through your DLI, all the way through 2021 or all the way through 2022 if you have an SSI app also. And then you file a new application, you say, I want to get SSDI. That door is now closed. You can't go back. Technically, there are some ways you can do that, but practically, for practical purposes, you're out of luck. You have lost the ability to take advantage of all those quarters of coverage that you paid in because your DLI is foreclosed because of that decision saying that, after your DLI saying that you're not disabled. So I'm trying to give you enough ammunition to ask more questions if you're in one of these positions. But it gets complicated once you get into like, well, do I have coverage or do I need to apply again? Circling back, the default would be, sure, go ahead and try it, but you're gambling if you do it.
Okay, I have a question about the company lawyers that you were mentioning that work with the LTD, with any kind of disability, they're going to maybe work with you if you have some of this coverage. Should we trust those lawyers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I can say that because I've done that. Okay. I worked with one of these LTD characters. I keep calling them characters. They are characters. with these LTD carriers before, and it was such a bad deal for me that I stopped doing it. You know, they just, it didn't pay very much, and it was not great work. So you trust them because all they're doing is trying to get you on benefits. And if they, I mean, you know, their motivation is they want to win. If you have LTD, you probably don't care. And that's what I found, that like my clients didn't care if they got on Social Security. They're already on LTD. So if there's a tension, it's that the attorney really wants to win so they can get paid. Um, and the claimant has less incentive because they're already getting paid. But sure, yeah, you should trust them. They're going to work hard for you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Any further questions? All right, looks like we all know it.
Hey, can I give one more piece here, if that's
Sure,
okay?
please.
Advice here. And oh, this is it. Okay, this is where I wanted to land. Because somebody had asked this in one of the questions that you sent over. That is, you know, getting approved for disability. Am I going to be able to manage my own claim? You know, and I think the rest of that question is, or should I get an attorney? And my advice is get an attorney. Get an attorney. I'm not here to advertise anything, but you know, hiring out the management of your claim is really the best way to management. A Social Security disability representative's job, whole job is to navigate a claim on behalf of the claimant. That's all they do. And it's not true that, you know, all representatives are created equal. It's not true that everyone does an amazing job, but you're better off putting your claim in the hands of somebody who knows how to navigate these waters. I did this, you know, I did nothing but Social Security for about, oh, I don't know, a good number of years early on in my Social Security career. I worked for Binder and Binder, who at the time was the biggest Social Security firm. They're a national firm. And I flew all over the place doing hearings. That's all I did. Just kind of did hearings in all kinds of different places. And I got to know the system really, really well. And you want somebody like me, without sounding too boastful. I'm not trying to brag here, but you want somebody who really knows the system and knows how to do it. You can't possibly compete with somebody like me, somebody who's been doing this for years and years, in terms of knowing what to do. It would be silly to imagine that you could do that. That doesn't mean that you can't manage your own claim. You might win. You might have good enough evidence that you don't need an attorney. But I think if you're worried about it, you should hire an attorney. Here's what it'll cost you. It'll cost you 25% of your back pay. So if you apply for benefits, it takes you 2 years to actually get across the finish line. You win 2 years later, then you've got some back pay right there from the time you applied. If you apply in 2024 and you claim a disability date of 2023, you've already got a year's worth of back pay baked into that claim. So most of the time, there's a good chunk of back pay, and that's what a disability attorney or a representative, that's what their interest is. Their interest is in some percent, not some percent. It's always 25%. Everyone has the same deal. 25% of your back pay. It's statutory, and it's also capped. It's limited at $7,200, $7,200. It's going to go up pretty soon. They just made this announcement like a week ago. It'll go up to $9,200. But my point is, you know, you don't have to pay anything out of pocket usually, and they can't charge you outside of that 25% 7,200 cap. It's illegal. They'll go to jail. So no one will do that. And that's why, you know, look around to see who you're comfortable with. If you're going to find an attorney, maybe call a few and do a little research. That's okay. It's okay to find out, you know, whether you have a good connection with the person that you're going to be talking to on the phone. But it's, I joke and say it's money well spent, because I'm joking because it's not money that you actually have to spend out of pocket. Some firms will charge you for copying and medical records and things like that. We pass on medical record fees when they are there, but we're pretty good at getting medical records for free, and it's become easier and easier to do that. So my advice is, it's a good idea to get an attorney. What I used to tell people is go ahead and apply. And this is actually still pretty good advice. Go ahead and apply. If you get denied, then come see me and we'll work up your file. But, you know, if you want to roll the dice the first time around and see if you can get there on your own, go for it. Well, I don't think I had, oh, I've got SGA here. There it is, 1350 a month. That was 2022 numbers. I don't think I had any other really significant slides. So I would say that if you have other questions, please feel free to get a hold of me. I've got my email address. Actually, this isn't mine. Mine is Brandon at.
I'm also very happy to share that with anyone. If anyone needs that information shared out with them, I have already given Brandon's information out to probably 4 people in the last month. So I'm happy to share that with you guys. Please feel free to email me. I think we may have lost Brandon's connection. So I think we're going to probably stop now.